Captain Tharin awoke from cryosleep with all the grace of a drunk stumbling out of a dive bar at 3 a.m. The ship's alarms were blaring, their cheerful insistence like a relentless hangover that wouldn't quit. On the bright side, he'd been out for a century or two, so at least it was a well-rested hangover. "Good morning, Exordium," he croaked into the calm, his voice as rusty as an old door hinge. It was a standard wake-up call, but the thought of a pleasant greeting felt as ridiculous as a three-legged race in zero-G. The control room lights flickered like a dying disco, casting shadows that danced across the consoles and reminded Tharin of better times, times when things weren't on the verge of catastrophic failure. Riley, his second-in-command, appeared on the holo display, her hair as tangled as a bird's nest made by a drunken sparrow. "Captain, welcome back to the land of the living. We've got company." "Alien kind or the fun kind?" Tharin asked, though he knew the answer. "Nothing was ever the fun kind out here." "Depends on your idea of fun," Riley replied, her monotone voice dripping with the enthusiasm of a sloth on sedatives. "We've got a terraformed moon under alien control," Tharin groaned, cracking his neck to one side. "Just perfect. A whole galaxy to wake up in, and we stumble upon the one place that's got a no humans allowed sign." As he stumbled to his feet, the rest of the crew began to stir, groggy complaints and muffled curses filling the air. Their dreams of finding a new home among the stars had just been slapped with a reality check, one that smelled faintly of alien bureaucracy. The Exordium had been dispatched centuries ago, a sleeper ship full of hopeful souls fleeing a dying Earth. They'd been promised a fresh start, a new world to call their own. But now, all they had was a moon with a, do not even think about it, aura. Kara, the ship's engineer, shuffled in, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "What's the sitch, Cap? We playing nice with the aliens or telling them to shove it?" "Depends," Tharin said, adjusting his uniform. "If they're hostile, I'll let you suggest the shoving. You have a better way with words." Kara smirked, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "You say the sweetest things." The crew gathered around the main display, where a holographic representation of the terraformed moon glowed with an eerie beauty. Oceans, forests, and sprawling cities dotted its surface, the handiwork of a species that apparently had no qualms about squatting on potential human turf. "Scans show it's controlled by the Zaxxar conglomerate," Riley said, tapping away at her console. "Not exactly known for their hospitality, more for their, let's call it creative taxation." "Ah, Zaxxar," Tharin murmured, the galactic equivalent of a used car salesman. A snort of laughter echoed around the room. The Zaxxar were notorious for their penchant for squeezing every last credit out of anyone unlucky enough to cross their path. Tharin leaned on the console, staring at the hologram as if it might give up its secrets if he glared hard enough. "Options, people." Pavel, an amiable giant of a man with more tattoos than teeth, shrugged. "We could always say hello and hope they like our charming personalities. Or," Kara interjected, "we could run away and pretend we never saw it." "Not exactly the bravest option, but given our luck, it might be the smartest." Tharin scratched his chin, weighing the choices. "Both tempting, but neither gets us the new home we were promised." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of unspoken fears. The crew had signed up for a chance at a new life, not another chapter in the human saga of getting screwed by the universe. "Let's try diplomacy," Tharin said finally. "We give them a call, see if they're in the mood for a chat. Worst case, we get some colorful insults to add to our vocabulary." The comms crackled to life, and Tharin composed himself, adopting the dignified aura of someone who hadn't just woken up from a cryogenic nap. "This is Captain Tharin of the human vessel Exordium. We're explorers looking for a new home, and we've found ourselves in your neck of the woods." There was a pause, long enough for Tharin to wonder if the Zaxxar were consulting each other or just enjoying making him sweat. Finally, a voice responded, smooth and oily like a politician's handshake. "Captain Tharin, lovely to meet you. This is Overseer Vicor of the Zaxxar conglomerate." You've encroached on our territory. Encroached? Hardly, Tharin replied, barely suppressing an eye roll. More like stumbled upon it in a haze of confusion and cheap coffee. Vicor's laughter was as false as his charm. Be that as it may, your presence here is problematic. Problematic's my middle name, Tharin said, leaning back in his chair. Look, Overseer, we're just looking for a place to settle down. Surely there's room for a few more neighbors in your well-manicured garden. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility and ulterior motives. The Zaxxar conglomerate is always open to negotiation, Vicor said finally, his tone dripping with the promise of 1,000 hidden fees. Negotiation, huh? Riley whispered, raising an eyebrow. Bet that comes with a bend over and take it clause. Probably, Tharin muttered, but what choice did they have? All right, Overseer Vicor, we're willing to talk terms. Splendid, Vicor purred. We'll send coordinates for a meeting. Prepare to be impressed by our hospitality. The comms cut out, leaving a void filled with the tension of a crew contemplating their next move. Hospitality, Pavel said, scratching his chin. Think that means they'll only shoot us a little, Kara snorted. Maybe they'll let us choose which limb we lose first. Tharin sighed, rubbing his temples. All right, folks, get ready. We're about to take a crash course in Zaxxar etiquette. As the crew dispersed to prepare, Tharin lingered by the display, watching the moon spin lazily beneath them. It was a beautiful sight, one that promised everything they could want if they could just survive the diplomatic dance. Here's hoping we don't step on too many toes, he muttered to himself, silently praying to any god that would listen, even the ones with a sick sense of humor. The day wore on, preparations a flurry of activity as the crew polished their uniforms and polished their sarcasm for the meeting ahead. The Zaxxar weren't exactly known for their patience, and Tharin suspected they'd take offense if he showed up looking like he'd just rolled out of bed. Finally, the time came. The crew gathered in the docking bay, their nerves masked by bravado and a healthy dose of gallows humor. Remember, everyone, Tharin said, his voice steady, smile, nod, and try not to insult anyone. To their face, anyway. The shuttle descended to the moon's surface, the view out the windows a patchwork of alien architecture and lush landscapes. It was the kind of place humans had dreamed of, the kind of place that made you forget that the galaxy was a cruel, unforgiving place. They landed smoothly, greeted by a delegation of Zaxxar diplomats who looked as if they'd rather be anywhere else. Vicor was among them, his smile as welcoming as a bear trap. Captain Tharin, Vicor said, extending a hand. Welcome to our humble abode. Thanks, Tharin replied, shaking the proffered hand. It was as smooth and firm as a politician's campaign promise. Nice place you got here. We like it, Vicor said, his eyes glinting with the promise of undisclosed expenses. Shall we get down to business? Tharin nodded, the facade of diplomacy firmly in place. But beneath it, the grim knowledge that their survival depended on the outcome of this meeting gnawed at him. The Zaxxar led them to a sprawling chamber, opulent in a way that screamed of wealth and bad taste. Negotiations began, the air thick with insincerity and the scent of impending betrayal. Iors dragged by, the conversation a dance of veiled threats and half-truths. The Zaxxar wanted tribute, a hefty price for the privilege of existing within their jurisdiction. That's quite the figure, Tharin said, eyeing the numbers as if they might rearrange themselves into a more palatable arrangement. Might need a payment plan. Vicor's smile was as predatory as a shark's. I'm sure we can accommodate. After all, we both want what's best for your people. Can't fault you for trying, Tharin muttered under his breath, the weight of the galaxy's indifference pressing down on him. As the meeting wore on, the dark undercurrents of the Zaxxar's intentions became clearer. They wanted control, a foothold in the human endeavor that was less about cooperation and more about domination. Finally, the negotiations came to a reluctant close, the terms scribbled down with the kind of dread usually reserved for last wills and testaments. It's been a pleasure, Vicor said, his smile a mockery of genuine sentiment. We look forward to a prosperous relationship. Likewise, Tharin replied, his smile as brittle as glass. As they shook hands, he couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just signed themselves into servitude. Back on the shuttle, the crew's silence was heavier than a black hole. They'd come searching for a home and instead found themselves dancing to an alien tune. "Well," Kara said finally, "that went about as well as expected." "If by well you mean we're screwed, then yeah," Riley added, her voice tinged with cynicism. Tharin leaned back in his seat, exhaustion and the weight of leadership pressing down on him. "We'll figure something out," he said, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. As the shuttle lifted off, the moon shrinking behind them, Tharin couldn't help but wonder if they'd ever truly escape the shadow of the galaxy's cruel chaos. But for now, they were alive, and that was something. "Let's get back to the ship," he said, staring out at the stars. "And maybe, just maybe, we'll find a way to turn this mess into something more than another chapter in humanity's long history of cosmic jokes." And with that, the shuttle accelerated into the black, leaving behind the promise of a new world and the cold reality of a universe that had never cared for human dreams. The shuttle's landing gear creaked like an old man's knees as it touched down on the moon's surface. Tharin glanced at Kara, who was muttering a litany of prayers, even though he was pretty sure she didn't believe in any of the galaxy's gods. Then again, it was hard to keep faith when every deity seemed to be playing dice with your life. They disembarked into air that had the crispness of a January morning back on Earth, minus the pollution and broken dreams. The Zaxxar had done a half-decent job terraforming this rock into something livable, though Tharin wondered if they offered refunds for the atmosphere. "Reminds me of my ex's place," Riley muttered, squinting at the distant skyline. "Nice to look at, but the mood's as welcoming as a porcupine in a balloon factory," Tharin snorted. "Don't tell me your ex was into minimalist dictatorship architecture too." They trudged along a path that was as out of place as a gourmet steak at a vegan festival, guided by a Zaxxar lackey whose face looked like it had been sculpted in a hurry and then left in the rain. The terrain shifted from pleasant to foreboding in the blink of an eye, like a politician's promise unraveling under scrutiny. "Anyone else feel like we're headed into an ambush?" Pavel grumbled, his eyes scanning the landscape with the paranoia of a lifelong conspiracy theorist. "If we aren't, I'll be disappointed," Kara replied, adjusting her tool belt. "I've got a wrench that's itching to meet some alien skulls." "Save the violence for Plan B," Tharin said, though he was secretly hoping it wouldn't come to that. Diplomatic immunity only covered so much, and a brawl with the Zaxxar was not on today's agenda. Their guide led them to what looked like a forgotten ruin, half buried under layers of earth and bureaucracy. Tharin's instincts screamed trap, but when you were already neck-deep in trouble, a little more dirt didn't hurt. "Charming," Riley said, wrinkling her nose. "Bet the Zaxxar won't even comp us for the tetanus shots." The entrance yawned open like the maw of some ancient beast, and as they stepped inside, the shift from bright daylight to shadow was as abrupt as a paycheck cut. Within, the air was thick with dust and the kind of desperation only humans could cultivate. "Welcome to the Resistance," a voice called out, echoing off the walls like a ghost with a grudge. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman with the kind of presence that demanded attention and maybe a little fear. Her clothes were worn but practical, much like the woman herself. Her hair was a wild riot of curls that framed her face like an electric storm. "Velian," she introduced herself, her eyes locking onto Tharin's with the intensity of a recruiter spotting fresh meat. "Captain Tharin," he replied, never one to back down from a challenge. "Heard you like to stick it to the man, or alien in this case." "You could say that," Velian said with a smirk. "The Zorathi Dominion's not exactly known for their kindness and charity, which, I guess, puts them in good company with the rest of the galaxy." "Zorathi Dominion," Kara echoed, brow furrowing. "Thought we were dealing with the Zaxxar." "Zaxxar's just the middle management," Velian explained, her voice carrying the weight of someone who's seen too much. "The Dominion's the real power." Think of them as the landlord who not only collects rent but also decides whether you get heating in the winter. Lovely, Pavel muttered. So, we're dealing with the landlords from hell, Velian nodded. Pretty much. They're expanding, and this moon's just the latest acquisition in their interstellar monopoly game. We got tired of them making us pay for the air we breathe. A sentiment I can get behind, Tharin said. But how do you plan to stop them? They've got a fleet and we've got, well, a shuttle and questionable life choices. Velian's grin was as sharp as a knife edge. Oh, we have plans, just need a few more pieces to fall into place, and maybe a bit of chaos to shake things up. Chaos is our specialty, Riley piped up. We're practically poster children for it. Good, Velian said, turning on her heel. Follow me. I'll show you what we're working with. They trailed after her, moving deeper into the complex. It was a hive of activity, humans and a smattering of other species working together in a way that was both inspiring and slightly terrifying. It was like a family reunion if your family was comprised entirely of rebels and outcasts. This is it, Kara whispered, eyeing the motley crew. Seems like we're up against impossible odds. Nothing new there, Tharin replied, a thread of defiance in his voice. We've made it through worse. Remember that time on Karo's Prime? Yeah, how could I forget, Kara said with a grimace. Still can't look at a pineapple without twitching. Velian led them to a central chamber, dominated by a holographic map that flickered like it was powered by wishful thinking. Here's the situation, she said, gesturing at the map. The Dominions got a stranglehold on the major settlements. We're here, she pointed to a blinking dot, right in their blind spot for now. And you're planning on what, storming their gates? Tharin asked, skepticism coloring his tone. Not quite, Velian replied. We're more into sabotage, less risk, more reward, and it has the added bonus of pissing them off. Keeps them on their toes. Sounds like music to my ears, Riley said, a hungry gleam in her eyes. But we need more intel, Velian continued. The Dominions got plans and they've got a big meeting coming up. That's where you lot come in. Recon, huh? Tharin said, scratching his chin. Not our usual gig, but we can adapt, assuming your info's good. It's as good as it gets, Velian assured him. We've got a mole in their ranks. Let's just say not everyone loves the Dominion. Tharin nodded, already feeling the gears turning in his mind. It was a reckless plan, but then again, he and his crew had never been fond of playing it safe. If they could pull this off, it might just give them the leverage they needed. Count us in, he said finally, unable to suppress a grin. After all, what's life without a little high-stakes espionage? The team spent the next few hours poring over the layout of the Dominion's compound, plotting their infiltration with the kind of detail that would make a military strategist weep with envy, or maybe just cry from laughter at their audacity. The plan was simple. Get in, grab the data, and get out before the Dominion realized they were missing a few terabytes of confidential delight. Simple, of course, was a relative term, much like sanity or a fair game of poker. As they prepped for the mission, the mood was a mix of tension and grim humor. Pavel, ever the optimist, was sharpening his knife collection, while Riley was recounting tales of past misadventures, each more improbable than the last. You know, Kara said, adjusting the settings on her tech gear, this might just be the dumbest thing we've ever done. I'd like to think it's dumb in a clever way, Tharin countered, checking his blaster. Besides, when have we ever let a little stupidity stop us? Good point, Kara admitted. It's practically our signature move. Ready? Velian asked, reappearing with a group of her best fighters. They looked like they'd been through the ringer, but their eyes burned with determination and perhaps a touch of insanity. As we'll ever be, Tharin replied, tightening the straps on his pack. Let's go give the Dominion a headache they won't forget. The journey to the Dominion's compound was uneventful, which was suspicious in itself. Tharin kept expecting an ambush or the sudden appearance of a complication. He was a firm believer that the universe never passed up an opportunity to screw you over. They reached the compound and slipped inside with an ease that was both comforting and unsettling. The place was a labyrinth of corridors and security systems, but Velian's info held true, and they navigated it like seasoned criminals, which, to be fair, they practically were at this point. In and out, nice and smooth, Tharin muttered, hoping his words would melt into reality like butter on a hot skillet. They reached the central data hub, a room filled with more blinking lights and screens than a department store during a clearance sale. Kara got to work, her hands dancing over the console with the precision of a concert pianist. "Got it," she announced, a triumphant note in her voice. "Downloading their dirty laundry now." "Great," Riley said, keeping an eye on the door. "Let's hope we don't get caught holding the basket." The download was excruciatingly slow, the kind of slow that made glaciers look like speed demons. But finally it was done, the data safely stashed away and ready to cause some serious headaches for the Dominion. "Time to go," Tharin said, motioning for the team to move out. Before they realize we've been redecorating. They retrace their steps, nerves jangling like loose wires. But luck, or whatever version of it they were currently riding, held, and they made it back to the extraction point without a hitch. "That was almost too easy," Pavel said as they boarded the shuttle, suspicion etched into every word. "Don't jinx it," Riley warned, her face a mask of concentration as she prepared for takeoff. The shuttle rose, the compound shrinking beneath them like a bad memory. Tharin allowed himself a small sigh of relief, though he knew better than to let his guard down completely. "Well, that was fun," Velian said, a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. "Now let's see how the Dominion likes their surprise." Tharin nodded, already thinking of the next steps. They'd gained a small victory, but the war was far from over. The Dominion was a formidable opponent, and they'd just poked a sleeping giant. "One step at a time," he reminded himself, watching the stars flicker by. "We'll figure this out." "We always do." The shuttle streaked back toward their base, leaving behind the promise of conflict and an uncertain future. But for the moment, they were alive, and they had a chance. In the grimdark corners of the universe, sometimes that was all you could ask for. Back on the Exordium, the crew was engaged in the universal pastime of patching up a piece of junk they called home. The ship groaned like an old thief forced out of retirement for one last heist. If spaceships could groan, which, given their luck, wouldn't be surprising if it started singing opera. Riley was elbow-deep in wires that may or may not have been important. She had the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else, like a dentist's office or a Zaxxar reconciliation committee. "I swear, whoever designed this pile of bolts thought redundancy was a new form of decoration." "Quit your whining," Captain Tharin replied, leaning against the wall with the ease of someone trying to look like they had a plan. "Complaining won't get this heap talking to the outside world again. Why don't we just get a new ship?" Kara asked, her voice laced with false innocence. "One that doesn't require a daily prayer and a sacrificial offering to start. Because, dear Kara," Tharin replied, "we're as broke as a politician's promise." Pavel, ever the beacon of optimism, chimed in from the corner where he was securing the airlock. "Don't worry, Kara. If we get desperate, we can sell Tharin's charm on the black market. I hear it's in short supply. That'll buy us about 30 seconds, Riley said, a smirk on her face as she connected two wires with a spark, cursing under her breath. "Let's see if this old tin can has anything to say." The ancient comm system flickered to life with a cough and a splutter, like an old man clearing his throat after 3 decades of chain smoking. For a moment hope flickered among the crew, only to be extinguished when the system spat static like a disgruntled radio DJ. "Well, that's progress," Riley muttered. "At least it's not completely dead. Give it time," Pavel replied dryly. "Everything on this ship eventually reaches that state. Aren't you a ray of sunshine?" Kara said, rolling her eyes. "Let's focus. We need to send a distress signal before the Zorathi get a whiff of what we're up to, or before the ship decides to implode out of spite," Tharin added, tapping one of the flickering screens with the air of someone who thought it might help. Just as Riley was about to make another attempt at coaxing life into the comms, a sharp, familiar beeping sounded through the corridors. A warning. the ship's version of a nervous breakdown. Something was approaching, and it didn't sound like the pizza delivery they'd jokingly ordered. "Guess who's coming to dinner?" Pavel said, checking the external monitors. "And they've brought the whole damn family, Zorathi," Tharin asked, though he already knew the answer. "The universe tended to kick you when you were down and serve the bruises for dessert." "Looks like it," Pavel confirmed, his tone grim. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before they are on top of us." "Great, we're a bloody welcome, Matt," Riley grunted, snapping the comms panel shut with a finality that suggested it would be a long while before she wanted to see another wire. Velian's voice crackled over what remained of their internal comms. "They must have tracked us back. Get ready for a quick escape. Things are about to get interesting." "Interesting," Kara repeated with a sigh. "The kind of interesting that involves running and screaming, no doubt." "Exactly the kind," Tharin said, already moving toward the cockpit. "Everyone, strap in. We're not sticking around for the Zorathi's version of room service." The crew scrambled to their stations, the ship coming to life under their hands. The engine roared, a sound like an angry beast waking from slumber. It was a comforting noise, if you weren't focused on the fact it might be the last sound they heard. "Take us out, Riley," Tharin commanded, taking his seat with the air of a man who knew the dice were loaded but was going to roll them anyway. Riley didn't need telling twice. Her fingers flew over the controls, and the exordium lurched into motion with a vigor that belied its ramshackle appearance. The ship surged forward, leaving the looming threat of the Zorathi ships behind like a bad date at a cheap diner. "Here comes the fun part," Pavel muttered, eyeing the radar that showed their pursuers gaining ground. "Fun," Kara repeated flatly. "I didn't realize we were redefining the word today." They weaved through the void, the stars blurring into streaks as Riley pushed the exordium to its limits. The Zorathi ships were relentless, like creditors with a vendetta, closing in from all angles. "Suggestions?" Riley asked, her voice calm in the way only someone who was used to dancing with death could manage. "Survive," Tharin said. "Everything else is optional." The ship shuddered as they skimmed the surface of a nearby asteroid, the proximity alarms wailing like banshees. If the Zorathi hadn't known where they were before, they certainly did now. "Velian," Tharin barked into the comms. "Any bright ideas from the peanut gallery?" "Hold tight," came Velian's reply, laced with tension. "We've got a surprise for our friends. Just keep them busy a little longer." "Busy," Kara echoed, shaking her head. "Like we're some intergalactic babysitters." But they kept the Zorathi busy, dodging and weaving through the asteroid field with the dexterity of a drunk acrobat. The exordium might have been ancient, but she had spirit, and that was sometimes enough. "Now," Velian's voice cut through the chaos, filled with a fierce determination that could probably move mountains, or at least shift a few stubborn Zorathi ships. There was a flash, a blinding burst of light that seared across the void. The Zorathi ships hesitated, caught off guard by the unexpected display. It was the opening they needed. "Punch it, Riley," Tharin shouted, his heart thundering in rhythm with the ship's engines. Riley didn't hesitate. The exordium rocketed forward, the stars stretching into thin lines as the ship surged into hyperspace, leaving the Zorathi stumbling in their wake. Silence fell, broken only by the quiet hum of the ship's systems as they coasted through the safety of the void. "Nice fireworks back there," Tharin said, his voice laced with a mixture of relief and admiration. "Just a little something we cooked up," Velian replied, a grin audible in her words. "Figured it might come in handy." "Handy's one way to put it," Pavel said, shaking his head. "I'd say it was more like a miracle. Save the praise," Riley said, her fingers still dancing over the controls as she set a course back to their temporary base. "We've got bigger problems. Like the fact that our plan to call for help just got shot to hell, not to mention our ship's on its last legs," Kara added, casting a wary glance at the console that was already flickering again. "Well, let's look on the bright side," Tharin said, leaning back with a weary smile. "We're not dead, yet," Pavel reminded him, ever the realist. "Yet," Tharin agreed, nodding, "but give it time." The universe loves a good joke, and we're the punchline. They settled into a tense silence, each lost in their thoughts as the exordium drifted through the cosmos. They'd survived another day, but the shadow of the Dominion loomed large, a reminder that their fight was far from over. Back to the drawing board, Kara asked, breaking the quiet with a dry chuckle. Back to the drawing board, Tharin confirmed, his voice devoid of resignation. If anything, there was a quiet determination in his eyes that promised they weren't done yet. The exordium limped back to the hidden base, battered but not broken. They'd lived to fight another day, and for now, that was enough. There were plans to make, allies to find, and a whole universe out there that needed a little shaking up. And as Tharin looked out at the stars, he felt a strange sort of hope stir within him. The kind that made you believe that maybe, just maybe, the underdogs could pull off something extraordinary. It was a foolish hope, perhaps, but it was the only kind worth having. The exordium limped back into the hidden base like a battered prizefighter who hadn't quite decided if the crowd was cheering or jeering. The crew gathered around the beaten-down table that passed for their war room, Tharin's voice cutting through the haze of fatigue like a captain who had just enough optimism left to keep the ship afloat. "All right, team," Tharin said, rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to knead out the worry. "We need a new plan." Riley snorted, flicking a piece of frayed wire across the table. "What's wrong with the old plan?" "Besides the little hiccup of nearly getting us vaporized. I liked that part," Kara added, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Pavel leaned back in his chair, somehow managing to make even that look hopeful. "Maybe we just need a little tweak, like a wrench to the head. Of the plan, not us. Feels like we're the ones getting wrenched," Riley muttered. The old comm sputtered to life, a signal reluctantly coming through, a gift from the gods of dysfunctional technology. It displayed a map, a convoluted mess of lines leading to a big red dot labeled Zorathi Stronghold. "Looks like a tourist trap," Pavel said, his grin failing to reach his eyes. "I'd rather be a tourist in a black hole," Kara replied, tapping the table with her nails. "At least you know what you're getting into," Tharin sighed, eyeing the map with the resignation of someone preparing to dive headfirst into a shark tank. "We need intel from that stronghold. They've got info on the Dominion's next move, and we can't afford to be in the dark." "Brilliant," Riley drawled, "because breaking into a Zorathi stronghold is obviously the safest idea we've had all week." "Look on the bright side," Tharin said. "If we pull this off, we'll have something to sell to the highest bidder." "Yeah, assuming we don't end up in vacuum-sealed bags," Kara shot back. Pavel clapped his hands together, trying to muster some enthusiasm. "Think of it as an adventure, or a massacre," Riley corrected. "But even the worst ideas had a way of turning into plans when you were desperate enough." The exordium's crew spent the next few hours wrangling with logistics, debating entry points, escape routes, and most importantly, who'd be the poor fool leading. In the end, they all lucked out by drawing the short straw. Armed with a half-baked plan and less common sense than enthusiasm, they boarded the shuttle. It creaked ominously, as if hinting at its own death wish. "You sure this thing isn't going to just drop us out halfway?" Kara asked, staring at the controls as if they were liable to bite. "If it does, we'll be the most stylish meteors this side of the galaxy," Riley replied, punching the ignition with more force than necessary. The moon loomed ahead, a barren, unwelcoming rock that apparently had a vendetta against human life. They ducked into the atmosphere, skimming over the surface like a pebble across water, aiming for the stronghold nestled against the horizon like a particularly suspicious zit. "Remember," Tharin said, his voice crackling over the comms, "we're in and out. No heroics." "I was kinda hoping for some heroics," Pavel said, his voice all wide-eyed naivety. "Yeah, well, save it for the movies," Riley replied, steering them toward a landing zone that didn't seem actively interested in killing them. Yet, as they landed with a bone-jarring thud, Pavel hopped out, his optimism barely dented by the probable death trap they just entered. "Ready to make history, or become it," Kara added, her tone light as they moved toward the entrance, weapons drawn more as a comfort blanket than a viable defense. The stronghold was as ugly on the inside as it was outside. Layers of bureaucratic gray, all adorned with no humans allowed signs that screamed subtlety wasn't high on the Zorathi list of virtues. "Keep your eyes peeled," Tharin murmured, leading the way down a corridor that seemed to stretch into infinity. "Not like we have a choice," Riley muttered. "This place couldn't hide a secret if it tried." Pavel, ever the optimist, took point, his eyes sweeping the sterile halls with a determination that was almost admirable. "First door on the left," he said, nodding at the map they'd managed to scrounge up. They moved quickly, entering a room filled with terminals and screens displaying unreadable Zorathi script. Riley went to work, fingers flying over the controls, trying to coax some useful tidbit out of the system. "Keep an eye on the door," Kara said, standing guard with a look that promised death or at least a stern talking to should anyone try to interrupt. "Got something," Riley murmured, her brow furrowed as she delved deeper into the data. "Looks like troop movements and something else." Her words were cut off by the sound of footsteps, a rapid staccato beat echoing down the hall. The crew exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. "Time to leave," Pavel suggested, his voice lighter than the situation warranted. "Good call," Tharin said, motioning for them to move. "We've overstayed our welcome." They turned to go, only to be met by a figure standing in the doorway. Zaxar, their supposed guide and the unkempt guardian of Exordium's secrets, was blocking their escape route. He didn't look surprised to see them. "Well, well," Zaxar said, a smirk on his lips. "Caught in the act, seriously," Kara exclaimed, her disbelief palpable. "We trusted you. Your first mistake," Zaxar replied with a shrug. "You think you're the only ones desperate enough to make a deal, traitor," Pavel spat, all remnants of good cheer evaporated. Zaxar laughed, the sound as comforting as nails on a chalkboard. "Look, I'm just trying to make a living. You know how expensive it is to get decent hair products out here." "Enough," Tharin snapped. "We're leaving." Now, Zaxar's hand moved to his belt, and that was enough to get them moving. They barreled past him, back into the corridors, the sounds of alarms blaring their soundtrack. "You had to jinx it, didn't you?" Riley grumbled as they ran, her mind already calculating escape routes. "I didn't jinx anything," Pavel protested, trying to keep up. "We need to get to the shuttle," Tharin said, breathing heavily as they sprinted down another endless corridor, the sound of pursuit growing louder. "Assuming Zaxar hasn't sold that too," Kara muttered. They burst out into the hangar, the shuttle waiting, looking as ready to flee as they were. Riley hit the controls, the shuttle whining to life with an enthusiasm that mirrored their own. "In," Tharin shouted, ushering his crew aboard with a speed that would have made the Zorathi jealous. They piled in, the shuttle lifting off with a lurch as they made their escape. Behind them, the stronghold's defenses came to life, a barrage of firepower that lit up the sky like a terrifying fireworks display. "Get us out of here, Riley," Tharin yelled, bracing himself as the shuttle dodged and weaved. "Working on it." Riley's fingers danced over the controls, the shuttle responding with all the grace of a drunken elephant. But it was enough. They cleared the atmosphere, leaving the Zoratha's wrath behind. In the safety of space, the adrenaline faded, leaving only the hollow ache of betrayal and the knowledge that they'd still have to face the music back at base. "Great plan," Kara said, her voice heavy with sarcasm. "Really nailed it this time. Could have gone worse," Pavel said quietly, though even he didn't sound convinced. Tharin slumped into his seat, exhausted but resolute. "We'll regroup. Find another way, sure," Riley said, her tone dry as she stared at the controls. "Just another day in paradise. More like purgatory," Kara corrected, sitting back with a weary sigh. They drifted through space, the stars indifferent witnesses to their plight. Zaxar had sold them out, but they'd live to fight another day. Tharin looked around at his crew, at the ragtag family they'd become, and couldn't help but feel a flicker of that foolish hope again. "Let's just hope the universe's got a sense of humor," he said, glancing out at the stars. those endless, unyielding witnesses to the madness that was survival. And a good punchline, Riley added, her voice tired but unbroken. As they set course for their hidden base, Tharin knew their fight was far from over. But no matter how bleak the odds, as long as they were together, they stood a chance. And in a universe hell-bent on kicking them when they were down, that was saying something. The Exordium limped back to their hidden base, a battered veteran of too many ill-conceived escapades. The docking process was less a graceful landing and more of a controlled crash. Tharin stepped out, surveying the sorry excuse for a hangar with a grimace that could sigh your milk. "Home, sweet home," Kara muttered, looking around at the rusting bulkheads with the enthusiasm of a condemned prisoner inspecting their cell. "You know, I always imagined a career in space would involve more space and less of whatever this is." Riley shrugged, adjusting her gun belt with an ironic smile. "On the bright side, at least we're not dead yet," Kara corrected, her eyes flicking to the ceiling as if expecting it to collapse. Pavel, ever the optimist, was already fiddling with a panel trying to coax some life into the comms system. "Cheer up, guys, we're still in one piece." "Mostly. Speak for yourself," Riley snapped. "I feel like someone used me to polish the floor," Tharin sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "As much as I love our little pep talks, we've got bigger problems. Zorathi aren't going to give up after one botched raid. Maybe they'll just forget about us," Pavel suggested, with the hopeful innocence of a man who hadn't spent enough time in the galaxy's more unsavory circles. "Sure," Kara snorted. "And maybe we'll win the intergalactic lottery while we're at it." Tharin glanced at the beleaguered crew. "We're outmatched, underfunded, and frankly out of ideas. But that's never stopped us before. Because we're too stupid to know when to quit," Riley added with a wry grin, earning a chorus of sardonic laughter from the others. Outside, on the moon's surface, the Zorathi were on the move. Surveillance feeds piped into the base's dingy command room showed troop formations, ominous in their efficiency. Tharin stared at the screens, feeling a cold knot of dread settle in his stomach. "We're gonna need a miracle," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "Or a better plan," Riley said, joining him at the monitors. "What's the play, Captain?" Tharin stared at the shifting figures on the screen. "We need to hit them where it hurts. If we disrupt their operations, we might buy ourselves some time, attacking an overwhelming force with our ragtag team." Kara shook her head. "Sounds like a suicide mission. Wouldn't be our first," Pavel pointed out, his voice surprisingly cheerful given the circumstances. "Or our last, if we're lucky," Riley added, her sarcasm biting enough to leave teeth marks. In the midst of their grim little huddle, the old comms crackled to life again. It was as if the universe couldn't resist adding insult to injury. A static-filled voice, barely understandable, filtered through. "Hearing this. Help, please." Riley cursed under her breath, adjusting the frequency with the finesse of a mechanic dealing with a particularly stubborn bolt. This thing's held together by prayers and duct tape. The voice became clearer, though still distorted. "Under attack. Coordinates. Need assistance." Tharin exchanged a glance with his crew. "Sounds like we're not the only ones with Zorathi problems." "Great," Kara said, rolling her eyes. "More victims for the meat grinder. Could be allies," Pavel suggested. "We need all the friends we can get right now, friends or dead weight," Riley grumbled, though she didn't seem entirely opposed to the idea. Tharin considered their options. Every fiber of his being screamed caution, but desperation made for poor bedfellows. "We've got nothing to lose. Let's check it out. Risking our necks for strangers," Kara mused, shaking her head. "We really are idiots. Idiots with integrity," Pavel said brightly, earning himself a cuff on the head from Riley. "More like idiots with a death wish," she corrected. "Let's not kid ourselves." Asterisk. The Exordium set course for the coordinates, the crew settling into a silence filled with the kind of camaraderie born from too many shared near-death experiences. Tharin watched his team, each member battle-scarred in their own right, each as stubbornly resilient as a cockroach in a nuclear winter. "So, what's the plan when we get there?" Kara asked, breaking the tense silence. Make it up as we go along, Tharin replied, the wryness in his voice a thin veneer over the unease. Good to know some things never change, Riley said, the corner of her mouth quirking up in a semblance of a smile. The moon's surface was as forbidding as ever, the terrain a barren wasteland that echoed their collective mood. The shuttle landed with a thud that suggested even the moon was sick of their presence. They approached the distress signal's origin, weapons at the ready, senses on high alert. The landscape was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made your skin itch. Feels like a setup, Kara muttered, her eyes scanning the horizon. Not like we have any other choice, Tharin said, moving forward. Always nice to know we're not just paranoid, Riley added, her grip firm on her blaster. They crested a ridge, revealing a small settlement beneath them, or at least what was left of it. Buildings lay in ruins, smoking craters evidence of a recent skirmish. Figures moved among the wreckage, some tending to the wounded, others standing guard. Looks like the after-party of a Zorathi barbecue, Kara said, her tone dripping with disdain. Let's hope they're friendly, Pavel said, raising a hand in greeting as they approached. A man stepped forward, his face lined with exhaustion and soot, clothes torn but his stance defiant. You the help we called for. More like a distraction, Tharin replied, lowering his weapon but keeping his guard up. The man gave a short, humorless laugh. Name's Gerk. We thought we were goners till you showed up, flattering, Kara said, her sarcasm lost on no one. How can we help? Pavel asked, his sincerity a balm amidst the cynicism. Gerk gestured to the wounded, the desperate, the tired. We're a resistance cell, or what's left of it. Zorathi hit us hard, damn near wiped us out. Welcome to the club, Riley said, her words cutting. Tharin nodded, taking in the grim scene. We've got a ship. We can get you out of here, not an option, Gerk said, his voice hard. We stay, we fight. We don't abandon our own, then let's make sure you get a fighting chance, Tharin said, his decision solidifying. We might not have much, but we'll do what we can. Suicidal bravery, Riley muttered, shaking her head. Our specialty. Better than running, Pavel pointed out, a rare hint of seriousness in his voice. The crew of the Exordium and the ragtag band of survivors set to work, pooling their meager resources. They fortified what they could, set traps, and prepared for the inevitable retaliation. Feels like pissing in the wind, Kara said, wiping sweat from her brow. Better than just pissing off the Zorathi, Tharin replied, his focus unwavering. The Iors ticked by, the oppressive weight of impending doom hanging over them like a storm cloud. But amidst it all, there was a strange sense of camaraderie, a shared determination that transcended their dire circumstances. We're gonna die, aren't we? Riley asked, pausing to look around at the grim faces. Probably, Tharin said with a shrug. But at least we'll go down swinging. Not exactly the pep talk I was hoping for, Kara said, but her lips twitched in a reluctant smile. The Zorathi arrived at dawn, their forces sweeping over the landscape like a tide of inevitability. Tharin and his crew stood shoulder to shoulder with the resistance, weapons ready, hearts steeled. Here they come, Pavel said, his voice a thread of tension. Let's show them what we're made of, Tharin said, his voice carrying over the field like a rallying cry. The battle commenced with a ferocity that shook the ground beneath their feet. Blaster fire lit up the sky, explosions punctuating the chaos with deafening roars. Amidst the carnage, the Exordium's crew fought with a tenacity born of pure desperation. Riley ducked behind a shattered wall, her blaster spitting fire. I think I preferred last week's suicide mission, yeah, at least that one had snacks. Kara shouted back, unloading her weapon into the advancing hordes. Tharin moved with purpose, leading by example, his actions a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Every step forward was hard fought, every victory paid for in blood. Keep pushing, he yelled, his voice cutting through the din. We've got them on the back foot. It was a lie, of course. But sometimes, lies were all they had. Pavel was a whirlwind of motion, his optimism fueling every strike, every shot. We can do this, in your dreams maybe, Riley retorted, but there was no true heat in her words. The tide of battle ebbed and flowed, victories and losses measured in inches. For every Zorathi that fell, two more took its place, their assault relentless. Running out of steam here, Kara called out, her voice strained. Just a little longer, Tharin urged, though the truth was becoming harder to deny. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running on fumes. The Zorathi advanced, their forces a wall of inevitability. Tharin looked around at his crew, at the resistance fighters, at the friends and strangers who'd become family in the crucible of war. Fall back, he ordered, a heavy weight settling in his chest. Regroup at the fallback point. They retreated, a controlled chaos of movement and cover fire. Tharin's heart pounded in his chest as he fought to keep his team together, to keep hope alive. They reached the fallback point, a defensible position among the ruins. Breathless, battered but unbroken, they regrouped, preparing for the next wave. We can't hold out forever, Gerk said, his face a mask of determination and fatigue. Then we hold out just long enough, Tharin replied, his eyes hard. We make them pay for every inch. The Zorathi were relentless, their assault a ceaseless tide. But the Exordium's crew and their newfound allies stood firm, their resolve a bulwark against despair. Amidst the chaos, Tharin caught Riley's eye. Still with me, always, she replied, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. And in that moment, despite the overwhelming odds, despite the looming shadow of defeat, Tharin dared to hope. They were blooded, battered, but not yet broken. As long as they stood together, they stood a chance. The universe might be hell-bent on crushing them, but they wouldn't go quietly. Not now. Not ever. And so they fought with everything they had for as long as they could in the name of survival, defiance, and the unyielding human spirit. The moon's surface wasn't getting any prettier. Tharin mused as he booted up the ancient console that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought ergonomics was a type of pasta. Dust-covered and decidedly non-functional, it stood in the center of a forgotten ruin they'd stumbled upon during their strategically disastrous retreat. This thing's older than my grandmother's secrets, Riley said, poking the console with the cautious finger of someone expecting it to bite back. Should we be worried it's gonna launch Earth's nukes or something? Earth's nukes were probably museum pieces by the time this was made, Kara retorted, kicking aside debris to clear the area around the console, revealing more of the arcane technology buried beneath. Assuming nukes were even a thing still, I'm more worried it might summon an ancient AI overlord who will judge us for our fashion sense, Pavel quipped, carefully dusting a panel that looked like it hadn't seen daylight in centuries, or lack thereof. Let's focus, Tharin cut in, because every leader needs to remind their crew that jokes don't win battles, even if they sometimes make the losing a bit more bearable. If this thing can help us disrupt the Zorathi control grid, then it's worth the risk. Velaine, their resident techno-wizard and occasional escapee from the realm of sanity, crouched beside the console, her eyes glinting with the kind of excitement usually reserved for first dates or last meals. This stuff is incredible, she breathed, tracing her fingers over the engravings that line the edges. It's not just old, it's different as in we're screwed, Tharin asked, not unreasonably. Different as in it's got its own language. Ancient human tech from way before the Dominion started rewriting history. Great, Kara muttered. We're gonna get blown up by a history lesson. I think it's a cipher, Velaine said, her voice tinged with awe like she just encountered a unicorn in a war zone. An encryption system they use to protect critical data. Tharin didn't like where this was heading. And we can break it. Velaine's grin was like a kid in a candy store who just found out the candy was all free. Watch me. As Velaine sank into a trance-like state, fingers dancing over the console, the rest of the crew kept watch, weapons at the ready. Paranoia was practically a survival trait at this point. Anyone else feel like we're about to open Pandora's box? Riley asked, her eyes darting to the horizon where any number of unpleasant surprises could be lurking. Pandora's box is an optimistic spin, Kara replied, her tone dry. More like Pandora's house of horrors. Just what we need, Pavel said cheerfully. A little more horror to keep things interesting. Minutes ticked by, feeling like an eternity, the air thick with tension and the distant sounds of Zorathi patrols. If they were going to do something bold, it had to be now, while the enemy was still regrouping. Got it. Velain almost squealed. The console came to life with a hum that was both ominous and reassuring. The holographic display flickered, then steadied, showing a complex schematic. Please tell me that's not a Death Star, Tharin said, staring at the display. Better, Velain said, eyes wide with excitement. Coordinates for key Zorathi control nodes. This thing's a map to their whole network. Well, shit, Riley said, not even bothering to hide her surprise. Looks like we've got ourselves a fighting chance. A long shot, Kara corrected, but better than nothing. Tharin felt a surge of hope, a rare and dangerous thing in their line of work. All right, crew, we've got a plan. Let's kick some alien ass, finally, Pavel said, cracking his knuckles. I was getting tired of running. They worked quickly, downloading the data and memorizing the most critical points. Every second wasted was an opportunity for the Zorathi to tighten the noose. As they prepared to move, Tharin laid out the plan, his voice steady with the confidence of someone who knew that failure wasn't an option, just a likelihood. We hit them where it hurts, he said, pointing at the key nodes on the holographic display. Disrupt their grid. Without it, they'll be blind and we'll have the upper hand. At least for a while. Upper hand until they figure out we're meddling, Kara reminded him, always the realist. Then we make it count, Tharin replied, because what else was there to say? As they set off, the crew moved with the kind of silent efficiency born from years of running, fighting, and surviving together. A dance of desperation and determination across the barren wasteland. The first control node was hidden beneath a Zorathi outpost, its alien architecture a jarring contrast to the natural landscape. Getting in would be tricky, but they'd faced worse odds before, or so Tharin kept telling himself. Time to crash the party, Riley said, her grin sharp and dangerous. Let's hope they didn't invite too many friends, Pavel added, checking his blaster's charge. Their approach was swift and silent, Velain and Pavel working in tandem to bypass security systems while Kara and Riley kept watch. Tharin led the charge, his mind focused on the task at hand, refusing to dwell on the potential for disaster. Almost there, Velain whispered, her fingers flying over the controls. Just give me another, got company, Kara hissed, cutting her off. Zorathi guards, alerted by something they'd missed, were converging on their position. Time to improvise, Tharin said, his blaster already firing as the first of the aliens rounded the corner. The fight was brutal and short, the Exordium's crew outnumbered but not outmatched. They fought with the kind of desperation that only came from knowing this might be their last stand. Each shot fired, each blow struck, was a reminder of what was at stake. A sudden explosion ripped through the node's power core, courtesy of Riley's careful handiwork. The resulting chaos gave them the opening they needed, and they retreated, leaving behind destruction and confusion. One down, more to go, Tharin said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. As they moved towards the next target, the world faded away, leaving just the mission, their crew, and the fire burning in their hearts. A fire fueled by the unyielding human spirit, the kind that refused to die quietly. The second node was even more heavily guarded, but they'd learned from the first and adapted their approach. It was a dance of shadows and violence, every movement calculated, every decision weighted by the knowledge that failure was not an option. Keep it tight, Tharin ordered, his voice firm. Like a noose, Kara replied, her smile fierce. Velain and Pavel worked their magic, the node's defenses crumbling under their combined skills. The crew moved with the kind of grace that belied their situation, a testament to their experience and their bond. Almost there, Pavel said, his voice tight with concentration. Let's not screw it up now, Riley muttered, her eyes scanning the surroundings for threats. The node went offline with a satisfying whine, and they retreated once more, the Zorathi forces scrambling to recover. Two down, Tharin said, his voice a thread of hope in the darkness. One more to go. The final node was nestled deep within Zorathi territory, a fortress of alien technology and arrogance. Getting in would be a challenge, but it was their last chance to turn the tide. Ready? Tharin asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it anyway. Ready as we'll ever be, Riley replied, her grin a challenge to the universe. Let's make some noise, Kara said, her voice steady and sure. The final assault was a blur of movement and chaos, each member of the crew a cog in the machine of their plan. They fought with everything they had, their actions a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The node's defenses crumbled, the Zorathi caught off guard by the ferocity of their attack. As the control grid faltered, the crew knew they'd done it. They'd turned the tide, if only for a moment. Let's get the hell out of here, Tharin ordered, his heart pounding. They retreated, the ruins echoing with the chaos they'd left behind. The Zorathi were in disarray, their control grid shattered, and the Exordium's crew was alive, battered but unbroken. Now what? Kara asked, her voice a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Now we make it count, Tharin replied, because this was only the beginning. They'd struck a blow, but the real fight was still to come. As they regrouped, the adrenaline fading, Riley looked at Tharin with a grin that spoke of shared victories and future battles. Still with me? He asked, echoing her words from before. Always, she replied, her voice a promise. And so they stood together, facing the unknown with defiance and determination. For in the end, it wasn't just about survival, but about standing up, about fighting back, about refusing to be crushed under the weight of the universe. Let's not die stupidly, Pavel said, breaking the silence. No promises, Kara replied, her smile wicked. Tharin nodded, his heart swelling with pride. They'd achieved the impossible, and now they'd face whatever came next with the same courage and tenacity that had brought them this far. In the grand scheme of things, they were just a ragtag crew with nothing but grit and stubbornness to their name. But sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was more than enough. And with that, the crew of the Exordium prepared for the next chapter of their journey, ready to fight, ready to survive, and ready to make their mark on the galaxy, one battle at a time. The Exordium was limping along, held together by duct tape and prayers, much like the crew's sanity. The Zorathi stronghold loomed in the distance, a monolithic reminder that life was often a series of really bad decisions followed by even worse consequences. But today, they were the ones holding the cards, a ragged deck, missing half the suits, sure, but cards nonetheless. All right, folks, here's the plan, Tharin said, his voice the steady, confident tone of someone who's seen just about everything explode at least once. We're gonna use the data we stole to make their defenses dance like a drunk on a slippery floor. Sounds like a solid plan, Riley quipped, her eyes glinting with mischief. Assuming we don't fall flat on our asses or get shot while trying to cut in, Pavel added, never one to miss an opportunity for doom-filled optimism. Could be worse, Kara chimed in. We could actually be sober for this. The console blinked angrily, its ancient circuits groaning under the weight of new commands. Velaine, the techno-wizard of the group, was in her element, fingers flying over buttons like a caffeinated pianist. Once we break their firewall, we'll broadcast a lovely little signal that should confuse their targeting systems, Velaine explained, as if explaining the weather. They'll be shooting each other in no time. Friendly fire, Zorathi style. I like it, Tharin said, a thin smile tugging at his lips. Let's hope they are as bad at recognizing their own as they are at negotiating with humans. The crew moved with efficiency born from years of dodging death and filing complaints with the universe's customer service. Their shuttle, a relic of better times specifically, times when they weren't constantly broke, descended toward the Zorathi defenses like a bird that had forgotten how to land. Think they'll notice us? Riley asked, her tone light, but her grip on her weapon anything but. Probably, Tharin replied, but by then they'll be too busy figuring out why their own systems hate them. as the shuttle landed with a thud that suggested a potentially expensive repair bill. The crew disembarked, weapons at the ready. The Zorathi stronghold was a fortress of alien arrogance, defenses gleaming with the kind of overconfidence that usually got one killed in horror movies. "Remember, we hit them hard and fast," Tharin reminded everyone. "In and out before they know what's happened." Like a bad one-night stand, Pavel snorted. "Except in this case, they're the ones who'll regret it in the morning," Kara quipped. The plan was simple in theory, but in practice, it was like threading a needle while blindfolded and upside down. Velaine led the charge, her device spitting out electronic interference like a digital confetti cannon. The Zorathi defenses blared alarms, systems scrambling to figure out why their own turrets were suddenly eyeing them with hostile intent. "Targets acquired," Velaine announced, a manic glee in her voice. "We're officially the least popular guests at this party. What's new?" Riley shot back, shielding her eyes as the first Zorathi turret lit up like a cursed Christmas tree. The chaos was immediate. The Zorathi were efficient, disciplined soldiers, but even they struggled to maintain order when the very technology designed to protect them decided it had a midlife crisis. Turrets swiveled wildly, spewing fire at anything that moved, including their own foot soldiers. "Looks like we've got their attention," Kara said, not bothering to hide the satisfaction in her voice. "Hopefully not enough to get us killed," Tharin replied, although he wasn't holding his breath. The crew moved through the stronghold, a tide of determination and gallows humor, Velaine's device keeping the defenses off balance as they carved a path through the chaos. The Zorathi, normally a well-oiled machine of military might, were reduced to a disorganized mess. "Talk about shooting fish in a barrel," Pavel laughed, narrowly avoiding a stray energy bolt. "Let's just hope we don't become the fish," Tharin muttered, leading the charge deeper into the heart of the stronghold. The final control node was less a fortress and more an oversized computer terminal, guarded by a handful of Zorathi soldiers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The crew dispatched them with the kind of efficiency that came from too many years of practice, paving the way for Velaine to work her magic. "Just a couple more minutes," she said, fingers dancing across the console as if it were a particularly complicated set of piano keys. "Take your time," Riley said dryly, ducking behind a wall as another turret went berserk. "We've got all day." The sound of Zorathi forces trying to restore order was a distant cacophony, but they were holding. "For now." "Got it," Velaine said, the console lighting up with a triumphant beep. "Their defenses are toast." "Great. Now let's toast us some Zorathi," Tharin replied, leading the charge back out into the fray. The stronghold was in chaos, Zorathi soldiers fighting a losing battle against their own defenses. The crew moved quickly, taking advantage of the confusion to sow further discord and destruction. It was a symphony of chaos and carnage, and the Exordium's crew was the conductor. With the control grid down, the tide had turned. The Zorathi were scrambling, a once mighty force reduced to a disorganized mob. The crew continued to press the advantage, cutting through the remaining defenders like a knife through particularly stubborn butter. "Almost feel sorry for them," Riley said, taking cover as another turret misfired. "Almost. They did this to themselves," Kara replied, her expression one of grim satisfaction. "They underestimated us. And look where it got them," Tharin said, stepping over a downed Zorathi soldier with the kind of casual disdain that came from years of fighting an uphill battle. The stronghold was theirs. The Zorathi were in retreat, their forces shattered by the betrayal of their own defenses and the relentless assault of a crew who refused to die quietly. "Think they'll come back for more?" Pavel asked, eyeing the retreating figures of the once formidable enemy. "Probably," Tharin replied, surveying the wreckage around them. "But not today." As they regrouped, the adrenaline slowly bleeding away, Riley looked at Tharin with a grin that spoke of shared victories and future battles. "Still with me?" he asked, echoing her words from before. Always, she replied, her voice a promise. And so they stood together, facing the unknown with defiance and determination. For in the end, it wasn't just about survival, but about standing up, about fighting back, about refusing to be crushed under the weight of the universe. "Let's not die stupidly," Pavel said, breaking the silence. "No promises," Kara replied, her smile wicked. Tharin nodded, his heart swelling with pride. They'd achieved the impossible, and now they'd face whatever came next with the same courage and tenacity that had brought them this far. In the grand scheme of things, they were just a ragtag crew with nothing but grit and stubbornness to their name. But sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was more than enough. And with that, the crew of the Exordium prepared for the next chapter of their journey, ready to fight, ready to survive, and ready to make their mark on the galaxy, one battle at a time. "Let's get back to the ship," Tharin said, a satisfied weariness in his voice. "Before anything else decides it wants to kill us today, and maybe grab a drink while we're at it," Riley suggested, her smile one of shared exhaustion and relief. "Here's to another day in the life," Pavel added, raising an imaginary glass as they made their way back to the shuttle. The Exordium awaited them, a battered but beloved home in the vastness of space. It had been a hell of a day, but they'd survived. They'd won. And for now, that was enough. As the crew settled into their battered ship, a sense of quiet contentment washed over them. They'd faced the odds, stared down their fears, and come out the other side, bruised but unbroken. For now, at least they could breathe easy. "Tomorrow's gonna be hell," Kara said, breaking the silence. "Tomorrow always is," Tharin replied, a grin in his voice. "But today we're still here, and sometimes just being there was more than enough." The aftermath of the Zorathi stronghold's downfall was as anticlimactic as a fireworks show in a rainstorm. The mighty Zorathi, reduced to a smattering of confused and disgruntled soldiers now, were slinking back to lick their wounds. The Exordium's crew, however, was savoring the rare taste of victory. A taste not unlike cheap whiskey, but they weren't complaining. Captain Tharin was leaning against a battered console, the grin on his face a mix of triumph and exhaustion. "Well, folks, we've done it. We've taken down a Zorathi stronghold with little more than duct tape, sheer willpower, and some very questionable tactics." "Questionable," Riley echoed, raising an eyebrow. "I prefer the term creative. Whatever gets us through the day," Kara added, rummaging through a stash of Zorathi supplies. "And speaking of getting through the day, look at what I found." She held up a bottle of something that looked like it might clean grease off an engine block faster than it would intoxicate a human. "Now that's what I call treasure," Pavel said with a chuckle, eyeing the bottle like a starving man might eye a feast. As the crew settled in for a brief moment of relaxation, Verlaine was busy on her tablet, fingers flitting over the screen like a concert pianist in a dive bar. "Looks like the Zorathi left us a few presents in their network," she said, her voice a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. "Presents? What, like more explosive surprises?" Tharin asked, only half joking. "Not quite, more like data. Lots of it." "Could be worth a fortune, or at least our next few meals," Verlaine replied, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "Ah, nothing like profiting from the downfall of an alien military complex," Riley said, grinning. "It's the little things in life that bring you joy." "Speaking of little things, what's the plan for this moon?" Kara asked, waving a hand at the chaos outside. "You mean after we've turned their fortress into a playground?" Tharin said, the thought of future challenges already tugging at his mind like an annoying stray cat. "I suppose we'd better make it livable for humans. You know, no humans allowed, signs notwithstanding. Rebuilding a moon. Just another day at the office," Pavel muttered, though there was a note of genuine optimism buried beneath his usual sarcasm. With the Zorathi in retreat, the terraformed moon was theirs for the taking. Not that it was an asset so much as a burden, like inheriting a haunted mansion with a leaky roof. But it was a start, and for a crew perpetually on the brink of ruin, a start was as good as gold. Verlaine pulled up a holomap of the moon's surface. "We've got this whole place to ourselves now." I suggest we start by securing essential systems, air, water, power. You know the fun stuff, basic human necessities. Always a good place to start, Riley quipped, her tone light but her eyes serious. And here I thought living on a spaceship was rough. The rest of the crew got to work, their banter as much a part of the rebuilding process as the physical labor. As they repurposed Zorathi tech and infrastructure for their own needs, they couldn't help but marvel at the irony. From conquerors to caretakers, Kara mused, wiping sweat from her brow as she jury-rigged a power converter. Life's funny that way, Tharin replied, a shadow of thoughtfulness crossing his face. We came here to survive, ended up thriving. Kinda, thriving might be a bit of an overstatement, Pavel said, ever the realist. I'd settle for not dying horribly in the next week. The moon's barren surface, once a symbol of Zorathi domination, was slowly becoming something else entirely. It was becoming theirs. And as they worked, they couldn't help but think about the absurdity of it all. Funny, isn't it? Riley said, glancing around at the ruins they were now calling home. We spend half our lives running from one disaster to the next, only to end up putting down roots in a wasteland. Yeah, but it's our wasteland now, Tharin replied, a note of pride in his voice. And we're going to make it a place worth living. As the crew continued their work, their camaraderie was palpable, a testament to the resilience that had carried them through countless trials. Each sarcastic comment and cynical observation was a reminder that no matter how dire the circumstances, they still had each other. Hey, Velaine, Tharin called out as he surveyed the progress. How's that data looking? Anything we can use, plenty. We've got potential trade routes, Dominion movements, even a few Zorathi skeletons in the closet, Velaine replied, scrolling through the information with a satisfied grin. Could be worth a lot to the right people. And what about the wrong people? Kara asked, always ready to temper optimism with a dose of reality. Well, the wrong people might want to kill us for it. But then that's not exactly new, is it? Velaine shrugged. Tharin chuckled, shaking his head. No, it's not. But at least it'll keep things interesting. As the sun set on their newly acquired moon, the crew gathered around a makeshift table, enjoying a meal of dubious origin and quality. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and for now, that was enough. To survival, Tharin said, raising a glass of whatever the hell Kara had found in the Zorathi storeroom. To making the most of bad situations, Riley added, clinking her glass against his. To whatever comes next, Pavel said, a rare note of optimism in his voice. As they drank, the comm system crackled to life, a sudden, unexpected intrusion into their moment of peace. Guys, Velaine said, her eyes wide as she stared at the screen. I think we've got a problem. The crew gathered around, peering at the holo display as a garbled transmission scrolled across the screen. It was a signal, encrypted and ancient like a ghost from the past. Now what? Kara muttered, leaning in for a better look. The message was brief, but it was enough to send a chill down their spines. Unknown origin. Need assistance. Urgent. Looks like we've got more work to do, Tharin said, his voice a mixture of weariness and resolve. Can't ever catch a break, can we? Riley said, though there was a hint of excitement in her voice. Where's it coming from? Pavel asked, already thinking ahead to the next adventure. Not sure yet, but I'll find out, Velaine replied, her fingers already dancing over the keyboard. As the crew pondered their next move, Tharin found himself reflecting on the nature of power and freedom. They'd won a small victory, but it was just one battle in an endless war against forces far larger than themselves. Yet, for all the dangers and uncertainties, they were still here, still fighting, still standing against the odds. And as long as they drew breath, they would continue to do so. Whatever's out there, Tharin said, looking at his crew, we'll face it together. Damn right, Riley replied, her grin infectious. And so, with the promise of new adventures on the horizon and the strength of their unity at their backs, the crew of the Exordium prepared to face whatever came their way. They were survivors, rebels, and dreamers, and they wouldn't have it any other way. Let's get some rest, Tharin said, glancing at his weary but determined crew. We've got a long road ahead. As they settled in for the night, the stars above a silent witness to their resolve, the crew knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and new possibilities. But for now, they had each other. And in a universe that often seemed determined to crush them, that was everything.